right, and welcome back for week 3, where we're going to be talking all about social development. So great job on the happiness blogs. I agree with what so many of you have said. I posted a little cartoon of my own that I really like. That's just someone holding a happiness jar. They say, "Where'd you get that? I want it." And the person says, "You can only make it yourself." So I think that's really important. We tend to set these things, well, I'll be happy once and then you get there and you're still reaching for something else. So great answers, great job this week. And we're moving into context of social development. So this is the first part of Mod 2. This week you've got a quiz on family and then a blog around divorce or staying together. Some of you have done it. I think it's really interesting to read your answers. My personal experience with divorce, my parents got divorced when I was about 9, and just some of the opportunities that came for me from that wouldn't have happened if they hadn't gotten divorced. And so I'm interested to see what you all think, and I can't wait to hear your opinions. But with that, let us jump into this next chapter. So as we jump into this chapter, the first part is the family systems perspective. And basically, there's a lot of different relationships within a family. We have parent-child, we have parent-sibling, we have child-sibling, we have parent-to-parent, just a lot of different dynamics, and so we're going to break each one of those down. So there are direct and indirect influences that can happen in a family. A direct influence would be like witnessing a conflict between your parents could lead to feelings of insecurity. Your parents are fighting, you're like, oh my gosh, I saw that, I'm feeling insecure. An indirect effect would be more like when mom and dad fight, that leads to hostility, and then because parent is being hostile, kids are having behavior problems, and the opposite of that would be mom and dad are really supportive and their kids are really picking up on those, and those parents are modeling better ways to problem solve. Another piece of this chapter, you'll see dysfunctional versus more functional or better functioning family systems. Obviously, in a dysfunctional system, it's going to be really difficult to change those negative patterns. We've grown up, this has been modeled for us, this is the behavior we know, it feels normal, even if it is dysfunctional. We have a lot better coping skills, just we've witnessed and seen a lot more positive behavior, and we're able to replicate that as adults. So as we talk about socialization, parents really help socialize their children. We're using reinforcement and punishment, we're using modeling. So, if you're in a classroom, you're maybe have a behavior system in your classroom, and you're like, oh my gosh, great job, Timmy, raising your hand. And so we're trying to reinforce these more pro-social and more productive behaviors. And parents do that all the time for their children. They're reinforcing, they're punishing, they're modeling, they're setting boundaries. So I want to talk about 4 different parenting styles. And as you hear this, think about, what were your parents like? Maybe one was one way and one was another, but just think about this. So we have authoritarian, authoritative, permissive, and uninvolved. Okay, so an authoritarian parent is really strict. There's a lot of rules, demanding obedience, using power rather than reason. And really the focus of authoritarian is on obedience. Okay, an authoritative parent is controlling but flexible. There's reasonable demands, there's rationale provided. Normally these parents are accepting and warm, and they're open for a discussion. They're not just saying your curfew is 6:30 p.m. because I said so. They're saying it's 6:30. A lot of other kids your age have a 6:30 curfew, and you might say, well, we have dinner until 7 at my friend's house, and they're open for that discussion. A permissive parent, this really looks at a parent who makes very little demands. They really don't want to control behavior. There's barely any rules. There's no regulations. They're lax and loving and accepting, but really they're not enforcing any boundaries. Okay. This focus is having like a friend. This parent wants to be friends with their child and really just their child to be happy. And the final parenting style we're going to talk about is uninvolved parenting, which could be looked at as neglect or just an indifferent parent, really lax, really undemanding, often not even around. The focus for this parent is on their own wants and their own needs and not really their child's. So with all four of those parenting styles, obviously we have some outcomes that can happen. With an authoritarian, remember those are the really strict ones, they are most likely to raise a really anxious, fearful child, low confidence. Sometimes we see moodiness, just problems with their temperament. With an authoritative, we often see highly competent, well-adjusted children. They're able to have a healthy discussion, they're able to understand boundaries and be able to talk about them. With permissive parenting, often we see this child can be impulsive, self-centered, bossy. They've really gotten everything they've ever asked for, and there's been no rules and no regulations. And with uninvolved parenting, the research shows that we see more aggressive, selfish, rebellious children. Often we see a lower academic performance and things like that. This is their parent just really wasn't involved and around. Okay, so let's talk about parental control. So 2 ways that we can control our child. There's behavioral and psychological control. So behavioral control, we're really wanting to regulate the behaviors through firm discipline, monitoring the conduct, and things like that. With psychological control, we're really almost manipulative in this style of parenting. We're withholding affection or bringing on shame or guilt, mind games almost. Normally when we use psychological control, this is associated with low social and emotional competence. You're not teaching any healthy skills by, not speaking to your child if you're angry at them. So next section I want to talk a little bit about is moms and dads. And so in this section, I think it's pretty interesting to think about what research has shown, what gender roles have really shown for both of these parents. And also I'm curious to hear your experiences with your mom and your dad, or if you didn't have one of those, did the other person take on both roles, or what did you see? But normally, and with what your book says is, we see moms are normally the caregiver, nurturing, the primary disciplinarian, while dads tend to be more of a playmate or a distant disciplinarian. Although moms tend to be more involved in daily lives, the father's contributions can be equally as important to development. We often see that dads who are involved, warm, loving, and supportive, their kids tend to be better at emotional and behavioral regulation. They're learning to control their anger, their aggression, and their impulses by playing with their fathers. There tends to be more peer positive relationships and things like that. The next part of this chapter is the co-parenting systems. So how do parents work together, if they're not together? And so there's 3 types of patterns. We have cooperative, hostile, and imbalanced. So in cooperative co-parenting, there's a high degree of family harmony. This is both parents are really working together. And this is whether you're together or not, but just having similar ideas and beliefs and really not going behind each other's backs. The hostile style, this is where parents are actively competing for their children's attention and loyalty. This would be like, every time they're with their dad, he takes them to McDonald's and buys them toys so that he seems like the really fun parent. When they're with their mom, she has to put in the rules because they're at school and they need to study. Not a great co-parenting style. And finally, the imbalanced involvement. This is where we invest different amounts of time and energy into our parenting. This is that gatekeeping or really limiting parenting involvement of the other partner. Let's talk a little about sibling relationships. So thinking about birth order, really important. Parents are statistically less attentive to their older sibling. Their older siblings can become less compliant. This can lead to a negative sibling relationship. Maybe they resent the new baby for taking their parents' attention. So for this one, I just want you to think, I don't have any siblings, but I'm wondering if you were the oldest, did you notice that? If you were the youngest, did you also notice that? And just think about, what did the sibling relationship have on your parents? Effective parenting really promotes positive sibling relationships. So we want to establish and maintain secure relationships with our older siblings, talk about the positives of a new sibling, make special time to be with that older sibling. Your book talks a little bit about how sibling relationships advance and progress across development. We see that these relationships just become a little more casual. Maybe you spend less time together, they're less emotionally intense, the rivalry really decreases, and the love for one another increases. I have a couple slides here just around the effects of siblings. So maybe your older sibling is more likely to be involved in risky behavior like smoking or drugs or alcohol, and that can predict the younger sibling's involvement. If you have no siblings, so you're an only child, this often does not put your child at any disadvantage. A variety of relationships really contribute to their social development. So I know for me, as an only child, didn't have any siblings, so my models were often adults or making friends with anyone that I met. And so, just different relationships are formed based on siblings. All right, next section of this chapter is about parents' relationships. So with the birth of the first child, there tends to be a drop in marital satisfaction. That may have something to do with sleep, or that there's only so much love to go around, but we do see that happens. It is important to note, though, that the support by the spouse plays a huge role in how much that satisfaction drops. Support in a relationship like that can look like, making parenting more enjoyable and less stressful, sharing both the highs and the lows, both taking turns getting up in the middle of the night and also taking turns on those amazing moments as well. And that often predicts a healthy adjustment for the child. Interparental conflict, we're going to call it IC throughout this presentation. Exposure to that is an important thing to note. Some exposure to conflict is really important because we learn how to appropriately handle a situation. You're going to have arguments, you're going to disagree with people, and watching your parents model it for you in real life situations is important. If we were to never witness IC, we'd probably develop unrealistic expectations, and the first fight that we had with another peer or partner would be like, what? My parents never fought. This must be terrible. Something's not working. And so just really unrealistic. Okay, watching too much IC or witnessing too much of it can lead to some issues within children. Obviously if there's domestic violence, could be modeling, well, here's how you solve a problem. It's by physical aggression. So we just want to be sure what our exposure to IC looks like for our children. There's a couple theories at play here in observing that. We have observational learning, which is just when we watch something, maybe we want to do it, or we at least become desensitized to the fact. So if I'm watching my parents have an argument and they're settling it by keeping their voices calm and discussing it and having some sort of debate, then that will be behavior that I'll continue as I get older. Also, the emotional security theory is here. This is kind of based on the attachment theory. But witnessing this conflict can be emotionally arousing and threatens feelings about stability of the family and the personal security. So if we don't understand, our parents are arguing, we're like, that's it, they're going to get divorced. I know a person whose parents are divorced and they argued once. So we want to make sure we're also having discussions around that. All right, let's break down some explanations for the negative effects of IC. So first I want to talk about the cognitive contextual influence. And so this is just thinking about a child, maybe they're witnessing this conflict between their parents and they're perceiving it as a threat. Oh my gosh, my parents might break up. It's my fault. I wanted to get ice cream and they're arguing about it. And this can lead to some problematic outcomes. We also have the spillover hypothesis. And this is that these conflicts can lead into ineffective discipline or not having any emotional availability to parent our child following this conflict. All right, and so let's talk about divorce. And there's short and long-term effects of divorce: anxiety, depression, anger, problematic peer and romantic relationships, lower self-esteem. These are all possible effects of divorce. There's also a number of stressors that happen. This could be financially, you're losing an income. This could be where you live. Now you're living in two different places. This could be new responsibilities or anger. So there are definitely negative effects of divorce. Sometimes we see in divorce that there's less effective parenting going on. Whether you were working as a team previously and now that you're split, all of the responsibility falls on you, or if the divorce causes one parent to pull away, we see some negative effects of divorce. Depending on the timing of divorce, it can affect a child differently. In infancy, it can disrupt attachment. In early childhood, we often see the child lacks the cognitive abilities to understand the cause and consequences of divorce. Since kids are so egocentric at this age, they often blame themselves. That's it, my parents got divorced because that one time I wanted ice cream. Kids this age really lack the coping skills to handle their intense emotions. They can react really strongly at the time of divorce, may act confused or anxious or fearful. In middle childhood, our children start to understand the parents' relationship is really separate from them, but there's fears of abandonment and sadness. Around adolescence, if parents are getting divorced, these kids are really understanding the nuances of divorce. But they might withdraw from their family, move towards different peers, undesirable or not. There is some evidence that there's a longer lasting effect because of the adolescent development issues. You're starting to form your identity. You might be starting to date. Things like that can really be affected. Just a little bit more about divorce. Joint custody. This works best when conflict between parents is at a minimum and children don't really feel caught in the middle. Sometimes what will happen, or often what will happen, is a child's better suited. Maybe they'll spend the week with their mom because that's the school they're at, and then they'll go to their fathers for the weekends. Things like that could be that joint custody. As you're flipping through these slides, a couple more big ideas come up: remarriage, and just what the effects of that can be, whether it's a blended family or what it's like to have a step parent. Gets a little bit into socioeconomic status, this SES, and just some of the bigger challenges for low income families, and just some trends that your book talks about seeing. With a lot of these lower SES hypotheses, we're thinking about financial stress also contributing to some of these family dynamics. Your fuse is a lot shorter when you're not sure if you're going to be able to pay for your utility bills or you're going to have enough food for the week, and just thinking about how do we cope with having extra stressors. So I think that's all I'm going to talk about for this chapter. I'm excited to read some of your blogs. We talked about negatives of divorce in this, but I started to see in some of yours the positives of, not living in a place that is full of stressors. If your parents are constantly arguing, then yeah, it probably is better to not be in that environment. Someone had a quote in here that I really liked that was like, I'd rather live in separate houses than one that is problematic, was basically how it was stated. So I'm excited to read all about it. Here is this week's song. If you have any questions, let me know. I'll see you next time. Bye.